What I'm about to show you wasn't meant to be seen for another 50 years. I recovered a drive that the world's most powerful leaders tried to burn, melt, and sink into the ocean. It contains the names of presidents, billionaires, and royals, not just as guests on an island, but as players in a game so dark. It makes hell look like a playground. If this video disappears, you'll know they found me. Listen fast, because once you know the truth, there is no going back. It started on a Tuesday, a day so ordinary it felt invisible. In the heart of Washington, D.C., the air was thick with the usual humidity and the smell of exhaust. But inside my office at DataShield Solutions, it was cold enough to see your breath. My job was simple. I fixed what was broken. I recovered memories from dead hard drives and retrieved secrets from shattered phones. I was the digital ghost hunter. But I never expected to find a ghost that could kill me. At 4:15 p.m., a courier walked in. He wore no uniform, just a plain black windbreaker and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. He didn't say a word. He just placed a heavy, Pelican brand, waterproof case on my desk and pushed a thick stack of $100 bills toward me. $5,000. For a single drive recovery. Usually, we charge $500. I looked up to ask for the client's name, but the courier was already gone, leaving only the smell of expensive cologne and ozone in the air. Inside the case was an SSD drive, but not like any I had seen before. It was military grade, encased in a lead-line shell to prevent X-ray scanning. It was scarred, as if someone had tried to melt it in a fire and then threw it into the ocean. My heart began to thump against my ribs. This wasn't a corporate backup. This was something someone had tried very, very hard to destroy. I spent the first 4 hours just getting through the physical damage. Every time I touched a wire, I felt like I was defusing a bomb. By midnight, the office was empty. The city sounds outside had died down to a dull roar. I finally managed to bypass the hardware encryption. My monitor flickered, a green progress bar crawling across the screen. 10%, 20, 50. When the drive finally mounted, my computer didn't show a list of files. It showed a single, password-protected partition labeled, the archive, JE. The password wasn't a word. It was a 256-bit encryption key that took me another 3 hours to crack using a brute force server I had hidden in the basement. When the lock finally clicked, digitally speaking, my life as I knew it ended. The folders were organized by year: 1997, 2002, 2008, 2015, and, finally, 2019. I clicked on the 2008 folder. Inside were subfolders with titles that made my blood run cold. Flight logs, the Lolita Express. Island, CCTV, South Sublevel. Bank, transfers, Project Olympus. I opened the flight logs first. I expected to see names of criminals or lowlifes. Instead, the first name I saw was a man who had held the highest office in the United States. His name appeared 26 times. Beside his name were notes in shorthand: no security detail requested. Passenger took the red eye. Guest accompanied by 3 minors. I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking in the silent room. My hands were trembling so much I had to tuck them under my legs. This wasn't just a leak. This was a roadmap of a global conspiracy. I saw the names of Hollywood's biggest directors, men who lectured the world on morality, listed as frequent visitors to a private island in the Caribbean. I saw tech billionaires, the men who built the phones we carry and the social media we use, sending encrypted payments to offshore accounts in the Virgin Islands. Then, I found the financials folder. It wasn't just about the island. It was about control. There were documents detailing how certain laws were, passed in Europe and the US to protect these individuals. There were insurance files, videos, and photos taken in secret during these island visits. The goal was simple: if a senator or a prince ever thought about speaking up, these files would be used to destroy them. It was a global blackmail ring. But as I scrolled further down, I noticed something strange. There was a folder titled The Silent Partners. This folder didn't have names of presidents or actors. It had coordinates, locations in the middle of the desert. deep-sea cables, satellite frequencies. And then I saw the bank codes. Billions of dollars were flowing from the US Treasury into accounts that had no owners. The money was being used to fund something called the Weaver Project. I was about to click it when my monitor suddenly turned bright red. A message appeared in the center of the screen, written in white, capital letters. User unauthorized. Location logged. Cleansing protocol initiated. The red screen on my monitor felt like a physical heat against my face. I had worked in data recovery for a decade, but I had never seen a cleansing protocol like this. It wasn't just deleting files. It was eating the hardware. I could hear the internal fans of my computer screaming as the processor pushed itself to the breaking point. I didn't have minutes. I had seconds. I grabbed an encrypted high-speed bridge drive from my desk and jammed it into the port. My fingers flew across the keyboard, executing a manual interrupt command I had built for emergencies. I wasn't trying to save the whole drive anymore. I was hunting for the crown jewels. I dragged the folders titled Flight Logs, the guest list, and Evidence Sublevel 4 into the transfer window. The progress bar was a slow, agonizing crawl. 5%. 8%. Come on, I whispered, my voice cracking in the dark office. Outside, on the street below, the screech of tires echoed through the glass window. I didn't look. I couldn't afford to look. I heard the heavy thud of a van door closing, then another. No sirens. That was the scariest part. If it were the police, there would be sirens. This was a silent extraction team. At 12%, the elevator down the hall dinged. I lived in a high-security building, but I knew those locks wouldn't hold them for long. I reached under my desk and pulled out a heavy-duty magnet, ready to destroy the original drive the moment my bridge drive hit 20%. That was my minimum target. 20% of this data was enough to bring down empires. The transfer hit 18%. I heard the muffled sound of a suppressed submachine gun, shattering the lock of the main entrance. They were in the lobby. I grabbed my laptop, the bridge drive still tethered to it like an umbilical cord, and crawled under the desk. I watched the shadows through the crack in the door. 2 men in tactical gear, moving with the precision of special forces, swept into the room. They didn't shout. They didn't ask me to come out. They walked straight to my main terminal. One of them looked at the red screen and cursed in a language I didn't recognize, but it sounded Eastern European. He pulled out a handheld device that looked like a thermal scanner. He was looking for my heat signature. I held my breath until my lungs felt like they were going to burst. My laptop screen, dimmed to the lowest setting, finally flashed a green checkmark. 22%. I reached up and slammed the magnet onto the original SSD on the desk above me. The high-pitched whine of the drive dying filled the room. The men spun around, their suppressed weapons pointed at the space under my desk. I didn't wait. I kicked the heavy metal filing cabinet next to me, knocking it over to create a distraction, and lunged for the back exit through the server room. I hit the cold air of the fire escape and didn't stop running until I reached the alleyway 3 blocks away. I was shivering, not from the cold, but from what I had glimpsed in those final seconds of the transfer. I had seen a folder titled The Vatican Connection. I had seen a subfolder named Royal Debt, containing photos of a prince from a country that prided itself on its dignity, standing in a room with a gold leaf ceiling, surrounded by children who couldn't have been older than 12. But the most haunting thing wasn't the names of the famous. It was the dates. The files didn't stop in 2019. The year Jeffrey was supposed to have died in his cell. The logs continued. 2021, 2023, 2025. The operation hadn't ended. It had only changed owners. The island was still active. The guests were still arriving. And now, I was the only person outside of that circle who knew that the world's most powerful people were still paying for their silence with the lives of the innocent. I sat in a 24-hour diner, the laptop hidden in a newspaper on the table. I opened a file I hadn't noticed before. It was an audio recording from a high-level meeting in Davos. I put in my earbuds and pressed play. A voice I recognized. Instantly, a man who currently sits on the board of the world's largest search engine, was speaking. "We don't need to hide the files anymore," the voice said, cold and clinical. "We just need to make the truth look like a conspiracy theory. If they don't believe it's real, they won't fight it." I sat in the corner of that diner, the smell of burnt coffee and cheap grease filling my nostrils. But my mind was thousands of miles away, trapped in a digital hell. The audio file I had just heard was a death sentence. It wasn't just about a private island anymore. It was about a global architecture of control. I opened the folder labeled 2024 and 2025. My breath hitched. The list of guests had grown. It included names of prime ministers from Europe, governors from the United States, and CEOs of pharmaceutical companies that the world had been forced to trust. Over the last few years, the connection was clear. Every major global event, every policy shift, every war, it was all discussed in rooms where no cameras were allowed. And the collateral used to keep these leaders in line was stored right here on the drive in my lap. I knew I couldn't just upload this to a standard website. The moment the data hit a server owned by the big tech giants, their algorithms would flag it and delete it in milliseconds. I needed a dead man switch, a system that would broadcast these files to every corner of the dark web, and to thousands of independent journalists, simultaneously if I didn't. Check in every 24 hours. As I began coding the switch, I opened a video file titled The Davos Suite. The camera was hidden behind a smoke detector. In the frame sat a man who is currently leading the charge for a digital global currency. He wasn't talking about money. He was talking about human livestock. He described the general population as a resource, to be managed, harvested, and discarded when no longer useful. Beside him sat a former intelligence chief from the UK, nodding in agreement. They were discussing how to use a fabricated energy crisis to bankrupt small businesses, making the population entirely dependent on government subsidies. It was a cold, calculated plan to destroy the middle class. And then, the door in the video opened. A young woman walked in, looking no older than 19, but her eyes were vacant, as if her soul had been hollowed out. The man who wanted to control the world's currency stood up and placed a hand on her shoulder. The way he looked at her, it made me want to scream. This wasn't just politics. This was a cult of the elite who believed they were gods, and we were nothing more than insects. I felt a cold shiver down my spine when I saw a document titled Project Phoenix. It was a list of targets, journalists, whistleblowers, and even low-level politicians who had tried to look into the island's activities. Beside each name was a status: compromised, silenced, accidental, overdose, sudden cardiac arrest. I searched for my own company's name. I found it under a subheading: Data Shield Solutions, Monitor for Breach. They had been watching my firm for months, waiting for someone like me to stumble upon the truth. I realized then that my life was already over. There was no going back to my apartment, no going back to my cat or my morning routine. I was now a ghost in the system. I finished the code for the dead man's switch and linked it to a satellite array that didn't rely on the standard internet backbone. If I went silent for more than a day, the first batch of files, the flight logs and the bank transfers, would hit every major city's local news server. But I had to be sure. I opened one more file, a high-resolution scan of a handwritten ledger. It was a list of donations made by the world's elite to a foundation that claimed to save children in Africa. But the ledger showed where the money actually went. It went to a private security firm that specialized in discreet transportation. They weren't saving children. They were buying them. The names on this list were a who's who of the world's most philanthropic billionaires, men who gave speeches at the UN about human rights while signing checks for the abduction of children from war zones. I saw the name of a French billionaire, a German industrialist, and a legendary American investor. Each name was followed by a specific preference. Suddenly, my laptop's internal camera light flickered blue. just for a second. Someone had bypassed my physical shutter block using an advanced infrared hack. I wasn't just being tracked. I was being watched through my own screen. I slammed the laptop shut and threw it into my bag. I stood up so fast I knocked my coffee over. The waitress looked at me, confused, but I didn't stop. I ran out of the diner and into the rainy street. Across the road, a black SUV with tinted windows was idling. The same one from the office. They were following my laptop's MAC address through the city's mesh network. I needed to get off the grid. I needed to go deep. I drove through the rain for 4 hours, switching 3 different stolen cars to shake the GPS tail. My destination was an old industrial warehouse on the outskirts of Baltimore. It was a place that didn't exist on any modern map. This was the home of the architect, a man who had once been the lead cryptographer for the NSA before he realized the government was the very monster he was trying to protect. He was the only one who could help me harden the dead man switch. The architect looked like a man who hadn't seen the sun in a decade. His eyes were bloodshot, and his fingers moved like spiders across a wall of flickering monitors. He didn't say hello. He just pointed at my bag. "You're carrying a bomb, Alex," he said, his voice like gravel. "Not a physical one, but something that will burn the world down. Let me see the encryption." I opened the laptop, and as the files loaded, I saw the architect's face go pale. He had seen everything in his career, but this was different. He stopped at a folder titled Post-2019 Relocation. Inside were medical records from a private clinic in Israel. The records were for a patient who had undergone total facial reconstruction and a laryngeal transplant, a procedure to change the sound of a human voice. The world watched his funeral, the architect whispered, leaning closer to the screen. The guards fell asleep. The cameras malfunctioned. The autopsy was a joke. We all knew it was a lie, but we thought he was just hidden away. We didn't realize he was still working. He opened a high-resolution satellite photo dated July 2025. It showed a private estate in the mountains of Montenegro. In the center of the courtyard stood a man with silver hair, his back to the camera. But his posture, the way he held his left shoulder, it was unmistakable. It was him. He wasn't in a cell. He wasn't in the ground. He was sitting at the head of a new table, managing the same list of names, the same network of blackmail, but under a new organization called the Silent Hand. The architect's fingers flew across the keyboard. Look at the financial links. Alex, the money that used to flow into the island, is now flowing into a series of biotech labs in South America and Eastern Europe. They aren't just looking for pleasure anymore. They are looking for immortality. They are using the children they traffic for cellular harvesting. They are trying to build a literal master race of elites who never age and never die. I felt my stomach turn. This wasn't just a crime ring. It was a biological conspiracy. I saw documents signed by directors of World Health Organizations, approving experimental research on untraceable populations. It was a legal way to kidnap and kill without ever being questioned. The files showed that these labs were protected by private military contractors, men who were paid more than the soldiers of any official army. Suddenly, every monitor in the warehouse turned into static. A low-frequency hum began to vibrate the floorboards. The architect jumped up, his eyes wide with terror. They found the subquantum relay. They didn't follow you, Alex. They followed the data. They have a satellite-based AI that can track the movement of specific encrypted packets across the globe. Can we send the files? I shouted over the hum. I need 5 minutes. He yelled back. I'm routing the data through the old Soviet-era emergency network. It's the only thing they can't shut down with a single click. As the upload bar began to move, the warehouse doors were blown off their hinges with a deafening blast. But these weren't men in tactical gear. These were drones, small, silent, and fast. They moved through the air like lethal insects, equipped with high-precision lasers and facial recognition software. I dove behind a stack of old servers as a laser beam sliced through the chair where I had been sitting seconds ago. The architect didn't move. He kept typing, his eyes fixed on the progress bar. 90%. 95. A drone hovered in front of him, its red light scanning his forehead. Run, Alex. He screamed. The first batch is out. They can't stop the leak now, but they will try to kill everyone who has seen it. A flash of light blinded me, followed by the sound of a dull thud. I didn't look back. I grabbed my bag and jumped through a broken window into the freezing river below. As I swam through the dark water, I heard the warehouse erupt in a massive explosion. They weren't just killing the architect. They were erasing the entire building from existence. I dragged myself onto the muddy bank, miles downstream. I had no phone, no car, and no allies left. But I had a small, encrypted USB drive tucked into my waterproof sleeve. And as I looked up at the night sky, I realized that the dead man's switch had worked. My burner phone, which I had left in a hidden cache, began to buzz. Every major news outlet in the world was receiving a massive dump of data. But there was a problem. A big one. The headlines I was seeing on the phone's screen weren't about the elite's crimes. They were about a massive Russian cyber attack. The media was already spinning it. They were telling the public that the leaked files were deepfakes, created by foreign intelligence to sow chaos. The elite didn't just control the island. They controlled the narrative. And if they could make the world believe that the truth was a lie, then my fight was only just beginning. The mud felt like ice against my skin as I lay on the riverbank, gasping for air. The explosion had lit up the sky for miles. But as I looked around, there were no sirens, no fire trucks. In this part of the world, when the elite erase a building, the local authorities are told to look the other way. I reached into my sleeve and felt the cold, hard edges of the USB drive. It was the only thing left of the architect, and the only thing that could stop the lies currently spreading across the globe. I pulled out my backup burner phone. The screen's glow was blinding in the dark. Every major news network, CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera, was running the same headline. Cyber terror attack, foreign intelligence plants, deepfake data to destabilize the West. They were showing clips of the leaked files but with a fact-check overlay that claimed the faces in the videos were AI generated. They were using the very technology one understood to gaslight 4 billion people. The strategy was brilliant. By calling it a foreign attack, they could now legally arrest anyone who shared the files under the guise of national security. I saw a tweet from a prominent journalist who had tried to verify the flight logs. His account was suspended within 3 minutes. They weren't just killing people anymore. They were killing the truth in real time. I knew I couldn't just leak more data. I had to show them something that couldn't be faked. I remembered a folder the architect had started to decrypt right before the drones arrived. It was titled The Live Feed, Sector 7. It wasn't a recorded file. It was a backdoor link to a persistent satellite stream. I hiked 2 miles to an abandoned radio tower I knew was used by local ham radio enthusiasts. I needed a powerful transmitter to bypass the internet service providers. My hands were shaking from hypothermia, but the adrenaline kept me focused. I climbed the rusted ladder, the wind howling around me like the ghosts of the children on that island. I patched the USB drive into the tower's manual override. My goal was simple but suicidal. I was going to hijack the signal of the world's most watched event, the Global Climate Summit happening in London, where every leader on my list was currently sitting in the same room. As the connection stabilized, I saw the feed. It wasn't a video of the past. It was a live, infrared thermal view of an underground facility in the mountains we had seen earlier. But it wasn't a lab. It was a holding cell. I saw dozens of small heat signatures, children, moving behind thick concrete walls. And then, I saw the man with the silver hair. He walked into the frame, carrying a tablet. He looked at a camera, the very camera I was now controlling, and he smiled. He knew. He knew someone was watching. He leaned into the microphone of his tablet. And his voice, the voice, that had been surgically altered, erupted through my laptop speakers. You think you've won, Alex? You think the world cares? Look at them. He pointed to a second monitor on his wall, which showed the London summit. The world leaders were laughing, shaking hands, and signing treaties. They know I'm alive, the silver-haired man said. They are my guests. They are my partners. And the public? The public will believe whatever the screen tells them to believe. You are a ghost fighting a god. I'm not a ghost, I whispered, my finger hovering over the broadcast button. I'm the mirror. I hit the key. Across the world, the feed of the London summit flickered. The image of the French president giving a speech was suddenly replaced by the infrared heat, signatures of the underground cells. The audio of the summit was cut, replaced by the silver-haired man's own voice admitting to the relocation project. For 60 seconds, the world saw it. In sports bars in New York, in living rooms in Tokyo, and on the giant screens in Times Square, the truth was unmasked. I saw the faces of the leaders in London go pale. They looked at the cameras, realizing their insurance was now a public confession. But then, the signal died. Not because of a hack, but because the radio tower I was standing on was hit by a remote-guided missile. I felt the vibration before I heard the sound. I jumped from the platform just as the top of the tower turned into a ball of orange fire. I tumbled down the hillside, the world spinning in a blur of trees and fire. I hit the bottom and everything went black. When I woke up, I wasn't in the mud. I was in a room with white walls and no windows. My arm was hooked up to and for. A man in a tailored suit sat in a chair across from me, reading a newspaper. The headline said, "Satellite malfunction blamed for bizarre broadcast interference." The man looked up. He didn't look angry. He looked bored. That was a good try, Alex. Truly. You cost us about $4 billion in PR management and we had to retire 3 senators because of that 6-second stunt. Where am I? I rasped, my throat burning. You're in the one place where the truth doesn't matter, he said, standing up. You're in the sequel. You see, the world didn't rise up. They didn't storm the palaces. They went back to their phones. They argued about whether the video was a deepfake for an hour. And then they forgot. He walked to the door and turned back. We are not going to kill you, Alex. We are going to give you a job. Because the only way to keep a secret this big is to make sure the man who found it is the one who helps us hide it next time. Welcome to the Silent Hand. The door clicked shut with a sound that echoed like a tombstone being placed. I sat there, staring at the white walls. The hum of the air conditioner the only thing keeping me from losing my mind. They didn't lock me in a cell with bars. They locked me in a room of pure, sterile silence. The 4 in my arm pulsed with a faint blue liquid. I didn't know if it was medicine or a slow-acting poison, but I felt my senses sharpening, my mind racing at a speed that felt unnatural. Hours later, or maybe days, time had no meaning here. The wall opposite me slid open. It wasn't a door. It was a seamless piece of technology. 2 men in charcoal grey suits entered. They didn't carry weapons. They carried tablets. Stand up, Alex, the taller one said. The chairman is ready for your orientation. I was led through a corridor made of reinforced glass. Outside the glass, I didn't see a city or a forest. I saw water, thousands of tons of it, pressing against the transparent walls. We were underwater, deep enough that the blue of the ocean had turned into a crushing, eternal black. This was their sanctuary, a place beyond any nation's jurisdiction, built with the untraceable billions I had seen in the flight logs. We entered a massive chamber that looked like a high-tech cathedral. In the center was a circular table, and projected above it was a holographic map of the world. But it wasn't a map of countries. It was a map of flow. Information flow, money flow, and human flow. I saw glowing lines connecting the private island to the labs in South America, then to the political centers of Washington, London, and Brussels. You call it a conspiracy, a voice boomed from the shadows. The silver-haired man, the ghost of Station 4, the man the world thought was dead, stepped into the light. He looked younger in person, his skin unnaturally smooth, his eyes bright with a predatory intelligence. We call it management. Humanity is a chaotic, destructive species. Alex, left to their own devices, they would burn this planet to ash in a decade. We are the cooling rods in the reactor. We maintain the balance. By stealing children. I spat, my voice echoing in the chamber. By blackmailing leaders? By harvesting blood like it's a commodity? The silver-haired man laughed, a dry, hollow sound. Morality is a luxury for those who don't have to carry the weight of the world. Every leader on your list came to us. They wanted power, they wanted wealth, or they wanted to live forever. We simply provided the means. In exchange, they gave us their soul. And once we have their soul, we have their country. He tapped the holographic map. Look at the data, Alex. You leaked the files. You showed the world the truth. And what happened? The markets didn't crash. The people didn't revolt. They spent the last 48 hours arguing about deepfakes on social media. They are so addicted to their digital distractions that they will ignore a fire, even as it burns their own house down. We built that addiction. We own the platforms they use to protest against us. He walked closer, his presence cold and suffocating. We brought you here because you're a rare anomaly. You broke our encryption. You bypassed our AI. You have a mind that can see the patterns in the chaos. We don't want to kill that mind, Alex. We want to harness it. You will become the lead architect of our new system, the Panopticon, a global digital ID system linked to every bank account, every medical record, and every camera on Earth. Once it's active, there will be no more leaks, because there will be no more secrets. He handed me a device. It was a Neuralink interface. Accept the position, and you will have access to the real history of the world. You will live for 200 years. You will be a god among insects, refuse, and you will be returned to the riverbank. But this time, we won't miss. They left me alone in the chamber with the holographic map. I looked at the glowing lines, the web of control that strangled the globe. I felt the weight of the USB drive still, hidden in the secret lining of my sleeve, the one piece of data they didn't know I had. It wasn't just files. It was a logic bomb the architect had spent his life building. A virus designed not to leak data, but to collapse the entire digital infrastructure of the Silent Hand. If I used it, I would destroy their system. But I would also be destroyed. The facility would lose power. The life support would fail. And the millions of tons of ocean water would come crashing in. There would be no escape. Not for them, and not for me. I looked at the map one last time. I saw the faces of the elite flashing on the screen, the billionaires, the royals, the politicians, all waiting for their new architect to secure their throne. And then, I thought of the children in the cells. I thought of the architect's sacrifice. I sat down at the main console. My fingers, still scarred from the climb up the radio tower, hovered over the input port. I didn't have to be a god. I just had to be the one who pulled the plug. Orientation complete, I whispered to the empty room. I jammed the drive into the port and executed the command. Total system purge. The moment the command was executed, the silence of the underwater cathedral was shattered. A deep, guttural roar echoed through the glass walls as the virus began to eat the facility's brain. On the massive holographic map, the glowing lines of control didn't just flicker. They turned a violent, bleeding red before vanishing into blackness. This wasn't just a data breach. This was a digital cardiac arrest. Above me, the light shifted from sterile white to a rhythmic, pulsing crimson. Emergency klaxons began to wail. A sound that felt like it was tearing through my skull. Warning, a calm, synthetic female voice announced over the speakers. Core logic failure. Life support systems failing. Structural integrity at 60% and dropping. The sliding wall burst open. The silver-haired man rushed in, his face no longer smooth and controlled. It was twisted in a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He looked at the console, then at me. "What have you done?" He shrieked, his surgically altered voice glitching into a robotic rasp. "Do you have any idea what you've destroyed? This wasn't just a business, you fool. It was the only thing keeping the world from tearing itself apart." "The world will find its own way," I said, standing up. I felt a strange peace as the floor began to tilt. Without your hand on the throat of every nation. Without your shadow over every child. He lunged at me, his hands reaching for my neck. But the first explosion rocked the chamber. A massive overhead pipe burst, spraying freezing seawater into the room. The pressure was so immense it knocked him backward. pinning him against the holographic table he had used to play God. I saw the fear in his eyes, the fear of a man who thought he had cheated death, realizing that the ocean didn't care about his money or his secrets. "You're dying with me, Alex." He screamed over the roar of the water. "I died the moment I opened that drive," I replied. I turned and ran toward the emergency escape pods, not because I expected to live, but because the architect had left one final note in the virus code. There is a window of 10 seconds. One pod is hardwired to a manual launch. The facility was groaning now, a metallic scream of thousands of tons of steel, buckling under the weight of the Atlantic. Glass panels began to spider web. I reached the pod bay just as the main chamber behind me imploded. A wall of black water swallowed the silver-haired man and his digital empire in a single, crushing second. I dived into pod 4 and slammed my fist onto the manual launch lever. The world turned into a blur of violent motion. I was thrown against the padded walls as the pod shot upward like a bullet, through the small, reinforced porthole. I saw the lights of the Silent Hands sanctuary vanish as the entire structure collapsed into the abyss. The secrets, the blackmail, the biological horrors, all buried under miles of dark, heavy water. The ascent felt like an eternity. The pressure change made my ears bleed, and the heat inside the small craft was suffocating. Then, with a sudden, bone-jarring thud, the pod broke the surface. I lay there for hours, the pod bobbing on the waves of the open sea. I opened the hatch and breathed in the salty air. It was the first time in weeks that the air didn't smell like ozone or rot. As the sun began to rise over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, I looked at my reflection in the water. I looked like a ghost, but I was alive. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the very last thing I had saved. It wasn't a drive. It was a physical logbook I had snatched from the chairman's desk in the chaos. It contained the real names of the silent partners, the ones who weren't on the drive, the ones who were still sitting in their high-rise offices, waiting for a phone call that would never come. I knew the media would still try to call it a conspiracy. I knew the Silent Hand had branches I hadn't even touched. But as I saw a rescue ship, a real one, approaching in the distance, I realized something. They aren't gods. They are just men behind a curtain. And once you pull that curtain back, they can never truly hide again. I took a deep breath and looked at the horizon. The game wasn't over. But for the first time in history, the people had the lead. The ending note. They think they buried the truth in the ocean. But the ocean always returns what it takes. My name is Alex, and I am the one who survived Station 4. The files are gone, but my memory is perfect, and I'm just getting started.